Welcome to Community of Writers. I'm Sandra Shattuck, English faculty at Pima Community College, and my guest today is Frankie Rollins, also full-time faculty English at Pima Community College. We're going to talk about writing today. I'm so glad you were able to come.
I am so grateful to be invited.
Excellent. So we've got a bunch of questions, and I want to do a quick bio, and then we're going to go right into your writing. Full-time English faculty, and full disclosure, our offices are next to each other. You teach writing and creative writing courses, and you've been teaching creative writing for about the last 20 years to people of all ages on the East Coast and now here.
Yes.
And you published a collection of short stories called The Sin Eater and Other Stories from Queens Ferry Press in 2013. You're published in a bunch of wonderful journals, which you can find frankierollins.com. All kinds of information there. So we're going to start with one story, Tale. I'd like you to read from it because it's going to feed into my first two questions. And we do have questions from students about this story, but we'll do that later. So
Okay.
If you would be willing to read
I would.
from the short story Tale. So a young woman grows a tail. Start down there and then just to there.
Okay. All day, 5 days a week, I took phone calls for the brokers in their hive of offices. I directed their calls down the halls and corridors. I buzzed people in and out. I took messages, took calls, took rudeness. Suddenly I was bored. I no longer dreamt that someone would notice how efficient I was, that someone might call one day to find out about the pleasant and useful woman at the front desk. I realized how silly it was to think that anyone would ever call down and say that. I saved my grooming for work. The fur was quite thick by now. I picked things out and put them in a small pile on my desk next to my pink message pad. I combed the longest hairs and made them pliable. Some days with a little spit, I wrapped lengths of fur around my index finger to make curls. The time at work passed much more quickly. I didn't always feel like answering the phone. I began missing calls. When I did answer, I spoke the name of the firm, waited until the caller who they said who they wanted, never me, why would they want me, and sent them on through. Often, all the little lights lit up at once and I didn't hurry. I went one by one. They could wait or hang up. I didn't care. One day, at the rush time for phone calls, I'd left my tail curled on the desk while I handled the lines. There was a tricky knot that I was picking loose with a paper clip. It was a moment before I realized Mr. Lee, the boss, was in front of my desk and staring at my tail, which almost entirely obscured the desk calendar blotter. His cologne was so strong that I coughed. He said incredulously, "Is that an animal you've brought to work, miss?" I said, "This is my tail." It was the first time I'd said it aloud, and I could feel the blush all over my face. He lifted his upper lip in displeasure and said, "Don't joke with me. Animals are not permitted at work. This is a place of business." "You don't understand," I said. "This is my tail." I stared at his blotchy cheeks and nose. I realized I hated him, not only him, but myself when I was there. Hated the place, hated the phones, hated the urgency everyone pretended was real. I stood up and let the tail slide off the desk. It swung out behind me, rustling to the back of my skirt. I gathered the few belongings on my desk, a miniature African violet, my purse, a couple of pens. "This is a stupid job," I said to him as I passed, surprising myself. I walked across the floor to the elevator, pressed the down button, and felt my tail swishing behind me like an angry cat's. I could feel him staring at me. Jerk, 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 I thought. That's when it happened. My tail lifted all by itself and whapped down hard on the ground once, twice, 3 times. The elevator door opened and I got on. I turned and in a single motion lifted my tail with one hand, like the train on a gown, and pulled it in after me. Elegant tail.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. That's awesome.
I love that part. And I forget, I don't know how I can forget how much humor you have in so many of your stories, which is just wonderful.
Yes.
So that's a lead-in to, I'm going to combine these two questions because I think they kind of hang out together.
Okay.
But the tagline on your website says, writer of myths, fairy tales, and other true stories. And my question there, but I'm going to give you the other question too. In what ways do you view myths and fairy tales as true stories? And it segues into, in your new work on writing, you talk about wanting to be Raymond Carver when you were young and getting into the craft. And you really wanted to write like him, but you kept on writing fairy tales. So the question there is, can you talk a bit about that process of discovering your inner writing compass? I think they go together.
I think they go together.
Yeah.
We can mash it up.
Let's mash it up.
So I think, first of all, this idea of true stories about myths and fairy tales is that those stories are always talking about human nature. I mean, if you think of the Greek gods, it's all lust, love, abandonment, destruction, power, dominion, failure. Same thing with fairy tales. If you think about Hansel and Gretel, like they're siblings, they have a sibling bond. Their father abandons them for a woman. They're out in the woods, could be city, you could replace it with anything, and they meet a very bad person. And then what do they rely on? They rely on themselves, which is often what we learn we have to return to. So in that way, I do think that fairy tales and myths are as true as any story because they're dealing with our human situation and giving us ways to live our human lives, ideas about it. But in terms of coming to it, I wanted to write these very pristine, precise Raymond Carver stories that would be published in places where people would read them. Like the New Yorker, very public places. But then I would start writing, and I remember this one story, Boy in here, all of a sudden, this boy and his dog keep showing up and vanishing. It's supposed to be a story about a woman getting divorced, and then here's the boy again, and the dog is barking, and the boy's hilarious. And I'm trying, so I try, because I was an early writer, I tried to put a frame around it. It's a phone call. The narrator's telling somebody about the boy. And my mentor, Rebecca Brown, is a brilliant writer at the time, was like, what the hell is this stuff? Get this out of here. We don't need any telephone. Just tell us the story. Way more interesting to have the boy and the dog. And so I resisted for a while, but it just happens every time. It really happens every time. And I don't know what that psychosis is about.
Do you think every writer has that somewhere, that there is a kind of like an anchoring place or a center that the writer keeps coming back to, even if he or she is not wanting to write that stuff?
Yes, I absolutely do. And I think a lot of the writer's work is finding the place that feels safe, and the place or maybe not even safe. There's nothing safe about writing. It's very hard. But a place where the excitement is, where the searing, I have to say something about this lies. And it might be in the experience, and then however the form comes out. Because I know so many people who can write in many forms, right? You write in many forms. And so it's not necessarily form, but there is a searing place. I have a chapter in this new nonfiction writing book I've been writing about writing, and it's a chapter called Stray Cats, and it's about finding what comes to you, your material, and accepting it and letting it be part of you, instead of constantly being like, but I wanted to write like Raymond Carver. You just have to quit whining and deal with your stray cats.
Yeah, do you want to explain that a little bit about the stray cats? You want to explain the reference?
Yes, I guess not everybody knows about me and the stray cats. Every house I live in, a stray cat shows up sooner or later and inhabits the world around my house. And people are always like, it's you put out food. I'm like, I do not have bowls of food out before they show up, but I do feed them when they show up. But I have this very rich sort of community. They've become characters in my story. I have a narrator who became a mother cat and fed them. She morphed into a mother cat. So it's just a symbol for me of things that come to you. Because as they come to my yard, the stories that are going to come to my mind. And I just have to say, okay, like that boy and the dog, like I don't know why they were there, but I love them. I love that story now, so it's really just accepting your own imagination, I guess, is what I'm talking about.
Have you had instances where you've ignored it, and are there consequences to
Yes,
that?
always. There's consequences. That's what we call writer's block. The second you tell your imagination, I'm not going to let you do that, the imagination says, well, that's fine then. I'm not talking anymore. Enjoy your crossword puzzle. So that is a belief system that I have. And I teach students of all kinds about that if you have a thought come and you push it away, you will then sit there and not know what to write. And immediately, if they tell me what their first thought was, and I help them get over whatever obstacle, then they can write. It's really a magic truth.
And an easy guideline to follow, right? I mean, the enacting of it, like actually writing it, but just saying, okay, I'm pushing that away. That's what I need to write about. That's an easy guideline. It's like step 1, step 2. Then there's the writing, which is the hard part.
Right, exactly. Right. Yeah, exactly. And it's I have this theory about the fifth brain, that in the back of your head, like a cow has 4 stomachs, I believe we have 5 brains, each one of them doing some different process for us. And the fifth brain is the one that is the synthesizer, putting it all together, what they call the muse. But if you trust the fifth brain's the one who's bringing that up. It's bringing that to the fore, whatever idea it is that you're too afraid of, or it's going to upset your grandmother, or whatever reason you have for not wanting to write it. Right. The fifth brain is offering you a gift, and it's learning to accept that gift no matter how ugly the packaging.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
And that takes courage.
And it takes courage.
I think it takes courage to do any kind of art.
Yeah.
Anything.
Yeah,
period.
I completely agree.
So I guess kind of along that, I mean, I was really, the other day we were reading Tale in my writing class, and I realized that for most writers...
Thank you for doing that.
Oh, it's so much fun. So much fun. For most writers, what they're looking for is they're looking for the perfect metaphor or the perfect image. They're like swimming into figurative language. How can I make this language gorgeous? And it seems to me that what you do with Tale and then animal text, where the main character turns into a cat, or Taking Care of Esther, where the body literally falls apart, is you're taking the metaphor and you're making it literal. Mm-hmm. It becomes literal, so that, you know, when you read about slapping the tail up on the desk and like doing spit curls with it, right? Here's this thing that's not supposed to be able to happen, but it's there, and the reader is there imagining having a tail on the desk doing spit curls.
Right,
So is that something, I mean, would you agree that that's kind of what's happening, and do you do that on purpose, and is that a technique, or do you want to say anything about that?
Yes, I mean, it's a classic magical realism technique to anchor something super far out and unbelievable in such minute detail that your reader can't help but imagine it and comes along on it. And I just love that. I think that's such a powerful tool of turning the world upside down on its head, so that you can say something that we've said before, we understand, maybe we know it in our intellectual minds, but to understand it through image in a different way, I think speaks to an emotional level, a visceral level. It speaks through imagination rather than cognitive knowledge. I don't know how that's different, but but yeah, I think that, so I definitely use that tool, and I love that description of it, that I let the metaphor become.
I hadn't thought about that before, but it just occurred to me that's what's happening in these stories.
Yeah, it's cool.
And it's not as if you let go of metaphor, it's just you make the metaphor literal, and then you continue to use, you know, gorgeous imagery and metaphor and everything to
Thank you.
talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it's part of the fun.
Yeah.
Really. You know, what if you do fall apart and your limb is over there, what are you thinking about that arm? You know, it's so fun.
What are you thinking about that arm?
And well, she's in that instance, she's been hitting herself in the head because she's been very frustrated and upset with her life. And so what she thinks of with this character, Esther, is, it's too far away to hit me now.
There's my arm. Can't hit me now. That's a good thing.
Such a satisfying moment. Yes. Because you want to control yourself, whatever habits you have that are bad. This way, she's like, I don't even have to control it.
Right.
Arm's too far away.
So that's the joy, is that when you imagine a story or a situation and you follow through on it, that's the play and the joy.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And then ownership. I can own the discomfort of the real experience, of Esther's real experience of having her life fall apart. And then I get to own it in this other way where it's been made beautiful or strange or speaking in another voice that is special, I think, to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that speaks to, I think when people think about fairy tales, they think about children's stories and they think about nice little stories, even though if you look at some of the originals, the Grimms, the oral storytelling, you know, I mean, Cinderella's sisters really had a bad...
Oh, hacking off their heels.
I know, right?
Terrible mess.
So, but I mean, what you're talking about is deeply complex internal stuff happening in these stories where you're presenting us with something that is surreal, magical, but it's still...
But it's still just human, the human condition, just like all myths, fairy tales, all stories. I mean, that's what the New Yorker stories are all about too.
Right, exactly.
Right? Essentially is like, how do we make it through this experience or this day or this, you know, life?
Right.
That's what we're always talking about. So interesting.
Yes. Cool. Okay. So if you've just finished a sabbatical this past fall, do you want to talk a little bit about the project that came out of that sabbatical?
Well, yes, I do.
Good, that's wonderful.
So I had 6 months to, how many months was it? 3 months, I don't know. A bunch of months where I got to just write. And a friend of mine suggested that I write a book of nonfiction about writing for writers, just like a book of fire, basically a place for writers to warm their hands, right, when they feel like they're too far away.
That metaphor is just perfect. Seriously.
I mean, if I could just talk a metaphor entirely,
right.
I would get rid of other language. Maybe I kind of do anyways. But but when I went to write this book, the thing is that I write fiction. I mean, obviously, I think in these ways. And but I went to the computer and just started writing, and it just poured out of me. But what's so interesting is that it was me. It's like seeing myself for the first time, hearing my own voice talk about these things we're talking about, articulating this writing life that I've lived and been so deeply invested in. To see that woman come onto the page, into the book, and I mean, and she warmed my hands too, you know, as well as all the people I imagine reading it, and the readers who've read it so far who are finding it really exciting. So it's been an incredible experience.
So it's almost a weird torquing of the way you normally write and think. I mean, if you've been saying all your life you've been writing fiction, and then to step back and write a book about that craft. Yeah, it sounds like it's been very productive.
Oh yeah, I mean productive, totally. I mean, and changing, life changing. I mean, it's changing me somehow. I'm not far enough to know how. I mean, I have a draft, but even I can feel it in the classroom. In the classroom, the things that I'm saying. I mean, maybe I even feel more to have finally put it into words. I live so intuitively and say things so intuitively and teach so intuitively, but now I've put it down into language, and so I understand what I mean even when I'm saying it. Whereas, you know, sometimes I would teach and I would say it and then we'd have to sort through what I really mean. And now it's been articulated, and it's a very strong stance. I have a very strong stance. One of the things I found is that I really believe positivity and encouragement is a way to get writers to write their better work. You know, to be diminished only diminishes us. And so, you know, and there's a lot of pushback in the world against that. They think you have to be criticized and beaten down and humiliated to be made a better writer. Right. Whereas I think if we're encouraged to be your tallest self, what you will write will be so much more interesting.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
Yeah, thanks.
So to keep on with the craft, there's, because that's a lot, well, I mean, a lot of writing books are about how to do the craft, and yours is really about how to nurture the creativity, but you still talk a lot about craft. So there's an interview that you did with Sila Satterstrom in, I think, 2006. It's online. But I just love, even when you're talking about writing and not writing fiction, it's still just such gorgeous writing. So I was wondering if you would be willing, this is at the sentence level, and I love talking about sentence level writing too.
Yeah.
I think a lot about Virginia Woolf's feminine sentence or women's sentence as I'm looking at that. So I don't know if you just want to do like the last two or all three.
The last two.
So
I'm writing an island novel which bears oceanic sentences, huge waves, cresting waves, spooling tides of sentences. Other times I'll write a whole piece with sentences which are clear and spare, lakes, ponds, when the character or subject craves simplicity. Poetic lines are creeks, rivulets, inlets, any caught but still living water. Essays tend towards rivers of sentences, long and winding, by turns wild and dull. I'm fond of big, cracking rollers, the same kind of waves that surfers seek, I love in sentences. When the text calls for a glorious, impassioned, breathless sentence, I write it all the way out to where the waters break and thin and soak into sand. I depend on currents, also, sentences that change the pace. These must be clean, adroit. There are other sentences that come in on long, sinuous waves from other continents. Those are for dreams, abstractions, philosophies. Of course, I'm also fond of the curt ones, sounding like the slap of waves. These slaps jolt the text, shake it out of reverie. It's a long time ago.
yeah,
It's still true.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Just enacting in the language what it is you're trying to do.
Yeah. And I was talking about this island novel, which is set, it's a place obviously surrounded by the ocean, and the characters are constantly dealing with the ocean. So it's, that metaphor, I was living in that metaphor world there.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah.
All right, so I better get some tail questions in here because I promised my students that I
Oh,
would
good.
ask you
Please,
some
let's not
questions.
disappoint the students.
So everybody's already heard some of TALE, and you teach it in your Writing 102. I teach it in my Writing 102, and now my Introduction to Lit. But in my one of my Writing 102s, Jose Mendoza asked, when writing the story TALE, did you want readers to interpret the revelation for the protagonist into something they could relate to in their own life?
Oh, absolutely, yes. Totally. I especially, this is why I teach it in college, is because tale is also, the other spelling of tale, T-A-L-E, is about, our lives, making the tale of our lives. And I love college students who are making these tales, crafting these tales, figuring out what they don't want. A lot of them, especially in our community college, making a change from what they thought they wanted. And that those decisions that you make that shape the tale of your life, I think, are absolutely fascinating. And I mean, it's also profound because you don't know what you know until you know it. Right. So the decision, I mean, our narrator finds herself in this place, in this crappy dead-end job, and it's not until she realizes she actually thinks she's worth more that she's able to change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I want it to be universal because we all have these moments.
Right, exactly. Cool.
Good question.
This is, I mean, a couple questions were, does the tale represent something specific in your life? I don't know if you want to answer that, but I'll give you a couple questions and you can do a grab bag. What inspired you to write the story? That's from Maria Raigosa. Ashley Peto is the one who asked about whether the tale represents something. Stephanie de Leon asks, how do you get the inspiration to start writing something? So that's more general. Gabrielle de Leon asks, what are some writers or other people that have inspired you to write? So we've got about 4 minutes. It's all yours if you want to mess with any of those.
Well, this one, I actually, just to say, this story was, I read a story about a woman or a character who starts to grow a tail in Stacy Levine's collection, and I was in grad school at the time. That's why I started this, because I was like, oh, I want to write a tale story. I know what this means, even though her story was very different. what was the other? One of the other questions.
So basically, does it
Right,
represent
right.
something specific
Something
in
in
your
my life. Yes, I
What
do
is-
want to talk to that. Just that I was this narrator with this crappy part-time job. I've had 37 jobs in my lifetime trying to honor a writing life, avoiding bureaucracy, which is not my forte. And so I realized at some point that even these jobs, they just made money, but they were demeaning me at some point because I couldn't ever shine. You know, you hope you'll even shine in whatever little job it is, but it's not true. Nobody cares. I tell my students all the time, I'm like, when they're like, I have to work, I'm like, they will replace you in one day. You know, school's more important. So in that way, I think that's where that comes from, is out of that experience. And that decision to shape the tale, to be more intentional about your life.
I like that, to shape the tale. Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
So writers that inspire you?
Writers that inspire me. Oh, there's so many. You know, well, I have a quote from Brothers Dostoevsky on my, Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky on my arm, very influenced by the Russians. I do love Anne Sexton's fairy tale poems. And then modern living friends, Sela Satterstrom, who did that interview with me, and sort of drawing a blank. Virginia Woolf was a huge influence. Also Cormac McCarthy for those rolling, cracking sentences.
Right.
But all of it, I always read. I read all the time.
Yeah.
That's the main thing.
Yeah. That is something that I really love in the new work that you're writing, is that connection between reading and writing, that critical connection.
Yeah.
I really like that a lot.
It's actually the soil and the sun.
The soil and the soil and the sun. That's exactly wonderful.
See?
Is there anything else you want to say before we wrap up?
No, I feel great. The soil and the sun's awesome.
All right, we still have 2 minutes. So,
Okay.
did I have any other questions? Research.
What?
Can
Oh,
you
yes.
do a minute on research?
Yes,
the
I
importance
can.
of research.
Yes. So
in your
research,
fiction.
I do a crazy kind of research where I go to sites or to the library, and I'm actually plucking research like notes, like musical notes. I'm not doing it in any sort of librarian way. I'm looking for a certain tenor or a certain atmosphere or a certain mood. And so I'll just keep flipping, looking at pictures or reading text. I'm looking for like what color it looks like when you're dying of the bubonic plague, you know, what the smells are, or like what it looks like if you have a basket of fish at the ocean after fishing all day. Or so I don't even know what I'm looking for until I see it. So it's like I listen almost to the research and pull with my whole imagination and pull things out when they hit a certain tenor or ding a little sepia bell in my mind that has the place that I'm looking for, that idea or feeling.
Which is another question I had, but we're not going to be able to talk about, which is the cross-fertilization of these different disciplines, because I know you really work with a lot of visual arts and then music.
Yes, yes.
So,
Wow.
yeah, but I love that image of, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I appreciate Frankie Rollins coming. This is Community of Writers, and I hope you'll join us the next time. Thank you.